I had the good fortune when I was in Seattle. I taught in Central Texas for 19 years. And then, and I'll get a little bit more into it, but I want to do the video that MJ McDermott sent me. MJ made a video about 3 or 4 years ago. It's on YouTube, and it's about how reform math looks. And it's had over 1 million hits. And she was the president of my PTA at my school in Seattle. She is just fantastic. She's the meteorologist for the Fox News. Oh, I want to have 6 minutes given to MJ because I asked her if she would make this as the PTA president since we are across the street from the PTA. And I wanted a mom to talk to you. So if you'll play that for me.
I'm MJ McDermott. My twin boys just finished their junior year in high school, and as we squint toward high school graduation, I feel like we've successfully navigated the pothole-riddled road of math education. And my kids have acquired what I think is a solid math education with undeniable college readiness. But I had no idea when I was dropping my kids off in kindergarten that their educational journey would require such vigilance, advocacy, dexterity, and creativity from their parents. First of all, I was unaware of the good fortune we had of living in the neighborhood of North Beach Elementary School with its principal, Niki, who brought in Saxon math to the school, and the PTA paid for it. As a meteorologist with a background in math and physics, I was impressed with this skills-rich math curriculum with its impressive opportunity for practice and mastery of basic standard algorithms and other math skills necessary for moving on to algebra and beyond. The teachers at North Beach were on board and adept at implementing Saxon. My kids loved the worksheets when they were little where they could practice and demonstrate their understanding, and there was great reinforcement and review of skills such that they were mastered grade by grade. And I had no idea that North Beach was the only school in the Seattle School District with Saxon math when I learned that a district math adoption was underway, and that threatened Saxon at North Beach. I was the PTA president at the time and led our devoted parents to advocate for Saxon. We wrote letters, we testified before the school board, we were interviewed by the Seattle Times, but we lost the district-wide adoption. Everyday math was adopted, but at least the horrible turf investigations was dropped. The good news is that we convinced the district to give North Beach a waiver to continue using Saxon at least for a few more years. In the process, I testified several times before the Seattle School Board and before the State Board of Education, and I made a video of one of my testimonies that's been seen by over 1 million people on YouTube. Most significantly, though, I joined a group of advocates, parents and teachers, called Where's the Math? These advocates were working for excellent math, and still do, in Washington State. Several members have run for school boards and won, served on math adoption committees, and even sued the Seattle School District over math adoption. Some have even helped rewrite our state's math standards. And these good standards are being dropped for the not as good Common Core standards. Oh well. Anyway, on to middle school. I really dislike the middle school math curriculum in the Seattle Public Schools. It's called the Connected Math Project, 2nd edition, CMP2. And while I've heard that a lot of good math teachers in our middle schools have found ways to supplement and teach around the CMP2, I didn't want my kids anywhere near this cartoonish, word-heavy, skills-light reform curriculum. So my husband and I decided to look around, and we decided to send our kids to St. John Catholic Middle School. There they enjoyed 3 years of excellent traditional math with the more traditional Prentice Hall books. And they had terrific math teachers who were good at math, and they knew how to get students ready for high school math. My boys took and mastered Algebra 1 in the 8th grade. Right on track. For high school, we looked back at the public schools. Seattle had adopted the Week Discovering Math series, discovering algebra, discovering geometry, and so on. We wanted to avoid that, and happily, our reference school, Ingram High School, is an IB school. That's the International Baccalaureate. The head of the math department is a passionate math expert with a degree in mathematics. The IB curriculum is quite rigorous, so Ingram was able to purchase textbooks on its own, some of them pretty old, calling them pre-IB, and not use the Discovering Math books the rest of the Seattle Public Schools were using. Brilliant. So my boys will be graduating from Ingram next year with an excellent foundation in math, along with pre-IB, IB math classes. They're going to be taking AP statistics next year as well. They had calculus in their IB maths class this year, and one of my sons said, "Hey, calculus is easy, it's actually fun." And I said, "Of course it is, if you've been adequately prepared with good math skills all along the way leading up to it." Then he actually thanked me. He actually thanked me for making sure he got a good math education. A 17-year-old, 6'2" kid thanked his mom. And he smiled and went back to his math homework with ease and eagerness. Who could ask for more? So as my kids head toward graduation, armed with what I think is a good math education, I feel grateful that my family has navigated the thorny path of math. To future parents, I want to give you the courage to look at what your kids are learning and trust your instincts. If you see things that you believe are simply not good enough, join with other like-minded parents and educators and advocate for good math, good skills, adequate practice, and mastery of standard algorithms in your school, your district, your state, and I guess your nation, our nation, with more and more control going all the way to Washington, D.C. Finally, talk with your children about your high expectations for them. And if you feel you need to change schools, homeschool, hire a tutor, or even hold them back a year, do it. They only have one childhood with that sponge-like brain. Don't let them waste it. Thanks for listening, and best wishes.
Isn't she great? MJ was a hoot, and I loved her at North Beach Elementary School in Seattle. Now, I had spent most of my time in Waco, Temple, and Killeen, and went off to, I'm going to kind of back up a little bit, went off to the Spokane Indian Reservation because in the 1960s I was very involved in Indian education, and my mom said, just because you're Indian doesn't mean you can be radical. Get out of it. Because it was the 60s, and what can I say? You know, I thought, oh, okay, this sounds good. And so I left it for 30 years and said, I want to go back to Indian Ed. And I got to the Spokane Indian Reservation, had never really heard of Saxon math. And the superintendent had come down from Alaska, and we called him Ross Perot without the billions, because he was pretty hard-headed. And he said, you'll use Saxon? And I said, well, I've not heard good things about that. And he said, the book's in the room. Go to the room. And I said, okay. And when I used it, and I saw these Indian kids Zooming with Saxon math, after spending 19 years in Central Texas with Hispanic kids and black kids, lots of times I had only one white kid in a classroom. And I thought, wow, this is pretty good stuff. But it kind of taught the way I did anyway. For years, I would lecture for 15 minutes, give them guided practice for 10 minutes, and then give them independent practice for 15 or 20 minutes, and then we would check our work. And that's basically what Saxon does. You lecture for about 15 minutes on a new concept, and then you spend about 15 or 20 minutes doing half the homework problems, which I'll break here and say that if you have 30 problems, 85% of them are on the lessons prior to today's lesson, and 15% are on today's lesson. So when you're on lesson 126 at the end of the year, 85% of the problems are still on all the lessons before. It is constant repetition, constant going over. As Stan was talking about, the SALAD program that you designed in Oklahoma City, you're constantly reviewing. I saw Indian kids outscore the state of Washington's state standards. Now, these were kids from poverty. I have to tell you, when you're sitting on the stage as the principal then, and the valedictorian turns around and thanks you for teaching her algebra because now she's going to college, that's what teachers die for, is to hear that kind of statement. So, yeah, it was good. So I ended up with cancer and ended up having to go back to Texas where my friends would kick me in the butt and make me get well and do the things I had to do. I don't like being pinned up if I'm not going to, okay. All right. Anyway, came back to Texas, stayed here, worked for an education service center in Waco. I had been a special ed teacher, so now I was going to be the 504 coordinator for 69 school districts, telling them how they could get disabled kids help. Yeah, right. Okay. That lasted about a year, and I said, okay, I'm well. I'm going back to Washington State. So I went to Seattle. Was hired at North Beach Elementary. 85% white kids. Upper middle class. Parents working at Boeing and Microsoft. And I went to the superintendent and I said, why'd you put me there? I don't know how to work with all these white kids. He said, you'll figure it out. And so bottom line was, the parents were used to running the school. You know, I never could find the parents in my schools before. They just didn't come. So now I had parents who were telling me how to run the school, and I was going, wait a minute, no, my name's on the line. I have to kind of have something to say here. And I said, and besides, I'm looking at the test scores. I've always been told if you are 85% white, you should have top scores in reading and math and writing, right? You're smart. Well, you got a 36% passing rate in writing at this school, and you've got a 66% passing rate in math. What's going on? I don't know. They were good in reading because they were being read to at home, and they were coming to school knowing how to read. Now, calling words and knowing how to read are two different things. They could call words. So I talked to the teachers and I said, would you be interested in taking in Saxon math? And elementary teachers, folks, do not like math. They're not good at it. They're afraid of it. And I promised them that Saxon math would be easy on them. And you only need 2 hours of professional development, not 2 years like the reform programs need. So they said, okay, since you're a math teacher and you're the principal, we'll go ahead and do it. But we had site-based decision making. In Seattle, that meant we could decide what we wanted to use in our school. I talked to the district math people and they said, no way, you are not bringing Saxon into this district. And I said, watch me. I went to the superintendent, who was a banker by trade, because in Seattle you didn't have to be an educator to be the superintendent. And he was a banker who believed in the bottom line. And I promised him that I would deliver on the bottom line, and I said, I need approval to use Saxon math. He said, do it. So we did, and within 4 years, we went from 66% passing to 91% passing. But even more than that, because I had spent 17 years in journalism and really believe in grammar and really believe in accurate reporting. You know, the ABCs of journalism are accuracy, brevity, and clarity. Don't get that much now, but that's what you're supposed to have. And I talked to my teachers and I said, why are you making 36% in writing? Well, I found out they had been trained under whole language, where phonics was not taught, and where spelling was inventive, because we didn't want to hurt their creativity by marking them down on grammar. I said, that's bullspit. We are going to do grammar. So they had such a hard time getting used to me. Can you imagine in Seattle? An East Texas girl in Seattle? So we got phonics equipment, and we started a newspaper. A little newspaper for grades 1 through 5. And the first and second graders learned how to take pictures. They had photography pages, and they had to write cut lines for their pictures. That's how they learned to write, was just for the pictures. Then I brought in a journalist in residence 1 day a week, and she taught the kids and the teachers how to write grammatically. The kids had their own business cards that they had to go out and sell advertisements to pay for the newspapers, because we didn't have the money to pay for it. Cut to the chase, at the end of 4 years, they had gone from 36% passing to 89% passing in writing. And it was just curriculum. As someone wrote in the Education Week in 1997, it's the curriculum, stupid. It's the curriculum, and it's the training of teachers. The training of teachers. God help us if we don't get the training of teachers out of schools of education, we're in deep trouble. Because that's, amen, Stan, to that? So anyway, I finally retired in 2006 and came on back here and went to a meeting. Saxon Math was sold, and I'm going to get to you about what he was and why he was important to be having a book about. But it was sold as a company in 2000, 4, yeah. And 2006, they heard that I was available and maybe could be a sales consultant. So I went to a meeting in Dallas, and the lady standing up in front said, "Don't anybody ever mention John Saxon's name, ever, out loud." And I thought, what the crud, you know? Huh. And I sat there and I thought, what's she talking about? She said, "He's the worst thing that ever happened to Saxon math." And I thought, that doesn't even make sense. So I talked to her afterwards, and she said, "Oh, he's just too controversial. He's just too and I said, "Yeah, he has good results, and people don't like it." She said, "Well, you're not going to be able to talk about him if you work for us." And I said, "Bye. No, not going to do it." And then I was asked to help on the Texas State Math Rewrite Committee in 2011. And God loved Jim Milgram. I offered to be on the grades 3 through 5 because, do you know, the rubber hits the road at elementary level in math. You lose them in elementary level, you've lost them. And so I was on the 3-5 committee, and I kept hearing these staffers from TEA at the time that Robert Scott did not know they were doing this, saying, "We have to look at the Common Core." And I said, "No, we don't." "Well, we have to look at the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics standards." I said, "No, we don't. We just have to look at what we want in the state of Texas." And I was determined we're going to be 2 things in the standards. 1, no calculators, K-5. No calculators. And that's a Saxon thing too. The other was they were going to be required, the teachers were, to teach the standard algorithm of how to do multiplication and division. Not the fuzzy methods, not the funny methods, the standard algorithms. And they fought me on it in my committee. We can't do that. I contacted Jim and I said, "Help," because he had been in the beginning helping Texas with the original standards, or the pilot, the beginning. And he got a hold of people. Boy, did they not like that. I'm going to tell you, they didn't like that. I got chewed on about that. Well, you know, they have to chew. You know, he doesn't like anything. And I thought, well, that's okay. So anyway, that is in our new Texas standards. No calculators, K-5, and standard algorithms have to be taught because he carried the water, thank goodness. Thank you, Dr. Milgram, for that. Okay, one of the things that you probably noticed with MJ's video is she has a very high cultural value on mathematics. She's a meteorologist. She's a scientist. In America, we have a horrible phenomenon of not liking math. You can say to anybody in a conversation, bring up math, and they go, "Oh, I don't like math. I'm not good in math." And to point out how this is carried out in stores, I was in the dollar store the other day buying stuff for my kids I tutor, and I saw this cup holder, and it says, "Yet another day has passed without me using algebra once." Now, first of all, it's grammatically incorrect. It should be "my using," I think. Am I right, Sandra? Donna? I know with a gerund it has to be a possessive pronoun. So I thought, idiot. And the bottom line is we have created such a culture in this country of thinking you either have math or you don't. You can either do it or you can't. Not true. When I have Indian kids, 60% from poverty, who can do it, it can be done. It's the curriculum. And Saxon, got to do this disclaimer. On the little orange booklet that I handed out, on the back, it says at the bottom, all proceeds from my biography go to the West Point Department of Mathematical Sciences in honor of Lieutenant Colonel John Saxon. So I get no money for the book. Any money I get, God help us, it goes straight to West Point's Department of Math. The other disclaimer is I have no relationship with Saxon Publishers at this point. I never did. But in fact, Saxon Publishers doesn't want to have a relationship with me. because I explain in the book what was said at that Dallas meeting, because his daughter asked me to put it in the book. And I said, fine, I'll do that. So I don't have any dog in this hunt, but I will tell you K-8 books are still good. So please remember that, because the authors maintain control over the content when the company was sold. So the K-8 books are still good. The high school books have been screwed up. And so if you want to get a K-12 series, which is the only one in the United States, an American-made K-12 series with loads of testimonials of proof, and it's all in the biography, which you can take to anybody and say, here's proof. We have tests. We have proof that it works. But it's a K-12 series, except now, high school on up, you will not find the name inside the book of John Saxon. You won't find the name of any author, because the Algebra 1 and the Algebra 2 books, this is the classic. This is John's book. The first one he wrote in 1981. Well, this is the third edition, but this is what he wrote in 1981. You will find that the books now are made by what's called development houses. They assign a topic to somebody, they assign a topic to somebody else, and they put it all together. I call it chop shops. So if you're going to use Saxon K-12, which is provable, you get anything printed before 2003. After 2004, at the high school level, you're going to get the chop shops. But at the K-8 level, they're still good. And I'm saying that if you have a student who follows Saxon Math K-12, which I did on the Indian Reservation because it was a K-12 school, and we went all the highest that I could get my kids was geometry. So I'm encouraging people to remember, we know what works. We know what works. But when I realized in my Seattle evaluations that every year when I got my evaluation as a principal, I would get dinged because I was the only school with Saxon Math. And I would say, but we're scoring in the top 1% of the state now. And they said, results aren't important. It's the process that counts. The process is what's important, and you're not being part of the team. And I said, damn right. Yeah. Mavericks don't run with the herd. So here's the bottom line. If you're going to want to fight for children, which I realized when I kept getting those evaluations, it's no longer about children. It's about adults. And I can't, it's kind of like Stan, I can't be part of it. So I retired earlier than I planned on because I just could not be part of that system anymore. So I'm encouraging you to buy the book, to read the history of what it had cost John Saxon, who was a West Point graduate, who earned 3 engineering degrees, who had the highest award you can get as a combat pilot in Korea, who retired in 1970 and decided to teach an algebra class in a little community college in Oklahoma, and all of a sudden said, who had taught at the U.S. Air Force Academy, the cream of the crop, and now he's teaching a little community college, and he says, what has happened to our children? Why are they coming to me so deficient? And started writing problems for the kids of his own, and eventually created a manuscript. Could not get any New York publisher to publish it because he wasn't a member of the inside group. So he published, borrowed money, $80,000, published the book himself, started his own company in Norman, Oklahoma. He published the book in 1981. When he died in 1996, his company was worth $27 million. Homeschoolers love him. Half of homeschoolers use Saxon Math. That's about 1 million kids. Small schools use Saxon. Urban schools hate him because they're politically driven and they're union driven. By the way, Seattle is a very heavily unionized city. My teachers had union on speed dial. And I used to just say, okay, what's wrong now? But We also had 69 unions to deal with in Seattle. 69 unions in the Seattle School District. You know, janitors, cooks, whatever. So what you have to realize is that when you start dealing with this, you're going to have to fight, because he fought the whole time. When his children, 3 of them doctors, 1 a pharmacist, because he said, I want you to have your own life. When they sold the company finally in 2004, they were promised a lot of things. It hasn't all come true, obviously, as we can say. But what was really fun for me, the people who bought it were one of his biggest opponents and were one of the nastiest people around to him. They paid $100 million for his company. Isn't that good? Don't you know he's sitting on a cloud up there going, ha ha, got it going. So bottom line is this. I can't tell you enough good stuff about John Saxon, except to tell you that this is a man that when you see what he went through to help kids and what he was willing, I mean, he just never backed up an inch. And that's something that I'm having to learn, that we all have to do that. One of the other things I learned about John, even though I never got to meet him, excuse me, they say a biographer gets to know the person a lot better than others. His family has told me they've learned things about him that they didn't know. So I would really like for you to read, because I want John Saxon immortalized. That's why I wrote the book. I got tired of him being ripped. And I thought, I want this man immortalized. Now, I planned on 100 pages, got 400. So, anyway, everything is in there, and I'm going to suggest, I set a timer, because as a teacher, I always set a clock, you know, an oven timer, so I'm waiting for it to go off. Bottom line is that John Saxon is one of a kind. He was the Superman we were waiting for, and they tried to destroy him, didn't work. And he's still around because there are still people who can buy his books off of vendors. By the way, Stan, do you have an Algebra 2 first edition? Oh, come on up here. Stan is a big deal in my book. There's a whole section on Stan in my book.
Well, I was Mr. Saxon's first employee. He hired me and the secretary when he got too busy with the business, couldn't get the calculus book written. I wanted my kids to have the calculus book, so on. But I have a shameless advertisement. You talked about the latest books are corrupted, and I agree. In my garage, however, I have probably 24 at least of the second editions of these books. And if you know, have people, you know people that have them. Yeah, you have people that if you know people who would like, you know, the second edition Saxon books for the high school, let me know. My principal in Archer City, when I left there, said that I could take them. And I took them, and they're sitting there, and some students need them. So the second editions, the good ones, are still available. Okay? Thank you.
We cherish our Saxon books. And because I've kind of skipped over and knew that I had a little bit shorter time, there are a couple of things I want to go back and cover. This looks like a big book compared to, this is the Algebra 1 book. This is a 1923 Algebra 1 book. You know why the books have to be so much bigger now? They have to explain a whole lot more because the teachers don't know the math. You have lots and lots of examples. John Saxon's book also are considered dull and boring because there's no colored picture in there. There's no picture of a kid in a wheelchair. There's no picture of the Amazon forest being depleted. It is nothing but black and white problems with lots and lots of examples for anybody who's willing to sit down and learn. So while I was digging all this out, my algebra book, this is the third grade math book from 1933, I think, somewhere in there. And this was the 8th grade book I used in 1953. Almost all word problems, which now kids have so much trouble with word problems. But when you look at these books, and I tutor at a Catholic school, Saxon Math at a Catholic school in Waco, And I think, my Lord, why do they have to have such big, I mean, why did John even have to have such big books? It's because teachers and kids don't know basic math, so he's written it to be user-friendly. And one of the things he said is, if you are looking at a math book as a parent and you can't understand what it says, don't accept that. You should be able to understand what a third grader is supposed to be learning in math, right? Okay, so here's my thing. I worked for 19 years with high-risk, high-poverty kids, and I can remember, on the Indian reservation, his mother came to me one time and she said, do you realize how much the kids hate you? And I said, what's your point? And she said, well, you make them come in and they have to do homework and they have to sit and they have to be in rows and they're not in groups. I said, yeah, if they're in rows, they're in charge of their own little turf. They got this little turf right here. They don't get to talk across the way. They don't get to, no, right here. And she said, well, you're just too demanding. And I said, yeah, again, what's your point? And she said, well, we're just not used to that. And I, and I said, well, I'm Indian. And she said, but not the right kind. Meaning I wasn't the right tribe. You know, my grandfather was born on a reservation. He's Oto Sioux, but she was Spokane. You're not the right kind. And I said, well, you know, this is the way it is. Get used to it. I have to give her credit. 6 weeks later, she came back and she said, the kids love your class. And I said, okay, what's your point? You know, why? And she said, well, it's always the same. They walk in, there's structure, they know what they're going to do, they know what's going to happen, they know when things, and you use that timer. They know when it goes off. And I said, yeah, because especially with Indians, they go on Indian time. That's one of the reasons they can't keep jobs real well, because they don't show up on time. So they got to learn the importance of time. She said, well, they feel so safe in your class. Let me tell you what's happened with the fuzzy math. Let me tell you what's happened to boys. We feminized math with the fuzziness because we wanted to have lots of talking, because girls like to talk. We wanted to have lots of group work, and minorities can't learn either, like white males. The 1996 president of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics said in a radio interview, girls and minorities cannot learn math like white males. John Saxon said, that's racist and that's sexist. It's wrong. That's another reason they didn't like him. He always just said what he thought. And you look at it, and I can tell you we started losing boys in math and in school. And I would have to sometimes remind my little kindergartner teachers when I'd walk in and she'd be fussing at a little boy because they'd be sitting in a circle looking at the reading, and the little boys would be next to each other, and I'd love, this is how little boys learn spatial relations. They'd be hitting each other. And the teacher would go nuts, and I'd think, but you could say, hey, good spatial relations, that's the way to do it. And I said to her one day, Mary, little boys are not defective little girls. Think about it. You're wanting them to be like little girls. Stop it! And so we're losing our boys and we're increasing our special ed. We are increasing our special ed. When kids come from chaos at home and they walk into a room with no structure and there's chaos and it's free to feel any way you want to be with glass walls, they want a leader. They want someone who's going to protect them while they learn. They want safety, and that's what structure does for them. Our Indian kids Zoomed because they knew the minute they walked in the building, we were going to do the same thing every day the same way. They knew what to expect. So for our children's sake, please, please be willing, and tomorrow I'm on a panel to talk about what parents can do, how they can address the situation. For one thing, command. That's one thing John Saxon, I also learned from him. I was a military wife twice, and I can tell you, you learn to command things, not demand them. You have such authority when you ask for things. You have such authority, not being ugly, but you're strong, and they see that. And I'm asking you to be commanding as parents, as adults, because we can't keep throwing our kids away. And I think
think there's a special place in hell for those who have professional negligence toward children and will use their backs to get money, to be vendors, and to make anything they can out of education other than good, wonderful children.